Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. It has been 1 year since Donald Trump took office, and it has been, I think you'd agree, brutal in almost all ways. Masked, armed federal immigration officers looking like they're in the middle of a war zone in camouflage and long guns are subjecting the residents of Minneapolis to a violent and lawless occupation. While the president muses about sending in American soldiers and has his Department of Justice almost by the day go after local elected leaders. The economy is deteriorating, from unemployment to inflation to the tariffs Donald Trump has levied unilaterally. Hundreds of billions, maybe trillions of dollars in taxes on the American people, also leaving America even more isolated. The Dow Jones dropped almost 900 points today alone. Just in the past month, Donald Trump has seized and captured the president of Venezuela, brought him to the U.S. to stand trial, and announced we are taking their oil and selling it and then putting the proceeds in a private offshore bank account in Qatar that Trump controls. He's also threatened to bomb Iran as well as numerous other countries. In fact, our closest allies in Europe are preparing for a possible war with us because Trump wants somebody to give him Greenland and a Nobel Peace Prize. That obsession and its consequences were on full display today in Davos, Switzerland, as the annual meeting of world leaders became an emergency summit, frantic almost, to deal with an American president who is, not to put too fine a point on it, acting like an evil madman. And they've tried all sorts of strategies up until today, and they're still trying to coddle Trump like a toddler, to flatter him. Now they're facing an ominous fact that has been staring us Americans in the face for a year. The United States is a nuclear-armed superpower run by a would-be tyrant. And they are now talking about him like an enemy.
We need more stability in this world, but we do prefer respect to bullies. We do prefer science to plotism, and we do prefer rule of law to brutality.
The fact is, Trump only respects force and strength and unity. That's exactly what Europe should demonstrate right now.
I would like to confirm that they are an ally, but then they have to behave like an ally. You live in a time of monsters. Yeah. And it's up to him to decide if he wants to be a monster, yes or no.
Let me put this in words you might understand. Mr. President, off.
Things are so dire, the Prime Minister of Canada, our steadfast ally to the north, our neighbor, gave one of the best, most clear-eyed, sober, urgent speeches that I've heard a politician deliver in a very, very long time. And certainly not the usual kind of speech that we hear at places like Davos.
Great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons. Tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. But when we only negotiate bilaterally with a hegemon, we negotiate from weakness. We accept what's offered. We compete with each other to be the most accommodating. This is not sovereignty. It's the performance of sovereignty while accepting subordination. The powerful have their power. But we have something too. The capacity to stop pretending, to name reality, to build our strength at home, and to act together.
The thesis of Carney's speech is that the old order has been destroyed, that it lies in ruins, that this isn't just a transition, but a disruption. And it wasn't just world leaders. Visitors in Davos could see a glow in those snow-capped mountains after the sun set this evening, after a group of 10 local residents hiked up the mountain with 450 torches to spell out one message that shone down across the valley: no kings. Donald Trump is set to speak at Davos tomorrow, but while the rest of the world is describing him as the biggest threat to peace and stability in the world, he was exactly where you would expect him to be, at a White House podium for a very, very long hour and 44 minutes. And I've watched, 6-year-olds play baseball. A very long hour and 44 minutes boasting about his year of accomplishments.
Should have gotten the Nobel Prize for each war, but I don't say that. I say millions and millions of people. And don't let anyone tell you that Norway doesn't control the shots, okay? It's in Norway. Norway controls the shots. And by the way, I did more for NATO than any other person alive or dead. Officially reinstated Columbus Day. I like the name Columbus Day. The Italian people are very happy about it. Remember when you go to the voting booths, I reinstated Columbus. And I said to my mother, Mom, she would be there, always there for me. She said, son, you could be a professional baseball player. I said, thanks, Mom. We have a perfect system right now. We're making a fortune. We've never been stronger.
Do you feel like God is proud of the effort that you've put
I
in?
do, actually. I think God is very proud of the job I've done. And that includes for religion.
By the way, we saved you from some of the most vile stuff he did, more racism heaped on Somali Americans and Somalians. But he did that for 2 hours, while the rest of the world described the United States as a rogue state bent on domination. In fact, the White House staff conveniently typed up and printed out Trump on a big stack of paper sheets to read from that listed his supposed accomplishments with bullet points like number 243, stripped notorious crackhead and grifter Hunter Biden of his taxpayer-funded Secret Service detail. 245, signed an executive order to end the use of paper straws. How can people not be celebrating the streets? How can he not have a 65% approval rating? All this comes days after Trump announced he was forming a board of peace to basically supplant the United Nations, a board run by him where he plans on charging member states $1 billion to have a permanent seat on the board. Trump has already invited heads of state like Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, and Benjamin Netanyahu to join, and strong-arm leaders from nations like Hungary and Belarus. Over the weekend, Trump also received a text from the Prime Minister of Norway. You saw him talking about the Norwegians before. He's obsessed with them. He's convinced that the Norwegian president controls the Nobel Peace Prize. And he got a text that was honestly kind of flattering and supplicant, like all of these messages tend to be, desperately seeking to ease tensions with the U.S. over its positions on Greenland, Gaza, and Ukraine. Trump responded by text saying in part, quote, "Dear Jonas, considering your country decided not to give me the Nobel Peace Prize for having stopped 8 wars plus, I no longer feel an obligation to think purely of peace, although it will always be predominant, but can now think about what is good and proper for the United States of America," going on to insist on taking Greenland. Now, this is an obvious point, and it's been made a ton, but it's worth reiterating today on this 1-year anniversary. Us, Americans, electing Donald Trump is not just our problem for us. We have made it the world's problem because we have made ourselves the center of the global order. And the post-World War II global order has been predicated basically on U.S. hegemony. And to be real clear-eyed about this, and there's a lot of gauzy nostalgia here, that hegemony, that power that we have has been abused egregiously in many circumstances, in awful, bloody, and unforgivable ways, from Vietnam to Iraq and beyond. But that hegemony was also the ordering principle, along with a set of international multilateral institutions that were constructed, built on the big lesson of World War II, which is that autocratic regimes, expansionist empires, and fascists will create world war. And so we ended up with a system in which the world's oldest, most stable democracy, one of the victors of that war, was at the center to prevent that. And the best way to understand that structure, that post-war liberal order, is not as some liberal order, but really as a world war avoidance machine. The world war avoidance machine with the U.S. at the center has been running for 80 years now. And it's done a lot of bad things, but it has succeeded in that singular goal. And what we are dealing with today is what happens when the winners of World War II, one of them, realize the order they built is crumbling, and that the global hegemon is sounding and maybe acting now like an Axis power. Maybe we're the bad guys. And these allies are gaining a daunting awareness that Americans in the anti-Trump camp have had from day one. Something that's been clear from the first day that he was sworn in, when he unilaterally pardoned all the January 6th insurrectionists who had stormed the Capitol on his behalf, including the ones that beat the cops on the head and the ones convicted of seditious conspiracy. These allies are becoming aware that the most powerful person in the world is a danger and threat to it and making the world order unstable. And that means we're all in a lot of trouble.